All right. It's good to see people again as we resume after the hurricane. But look, no interruption of learning, right? We were last week we were here. There was a little hurricane. Then this week we're back. No problem. So we are picking up where we left off. Avodah Zarah 3:3. This is going to carry on with the idea of items that have images on them and what we do with them. So let's get down to work. I need a volunteer. No, only one. Zarah, you're volunteering?
Yeah.
Thank you.
1. If one finds utensils upon which is the figure of the sun or moon or a dragon, he casts them into the Dead Sea.
All right, so you find an item, and on it, it has one of these images on it. The presumption is that this is an idolatrous item, right? That has to be your going assumption. Now, would this assumption change if you're living in a place where there are no idolaters? That's a very good question, and one we're not going to go into too much detail. The basic short answer is probably. But given, as we're going to see in the Mishnah that we study tonight, how severe the prohibition is on benefiting from idolatry and idolatrous objects, you can't make that decision just casually. It has to be very, very clear. And for the rabbis in their day and age, if you pick up this pot, this spoon, this whatever, and it's got these images on it, you have to figure you're now holding something that is idolatrous.
What happened to the people that like to do a tattoo with the sun, the dragon, and all this?
Well, we don't get tattoos in Judaism.
But today it happened. So we can say that they are idolaters?
No,
Stupid.
right? Yeah,
No, in addition. Okay, but
stupid. We can say. In fact, I was just reading an article. I read so many random things. I was reading an article about how new research is showing that the ink from tattoos is showing up in the lymph nodes. That it goes through the whole body system and gets pulled into the lymph nodes as your body's trying to deal with this foreign substance. So it's an actual, not just what you're scarring your skin, it is damaging the rest of your body to have this from the ink. And you know what? If you really want to paint your skin, get some henna, right? And it'll look nice for a couple weeks, and then you can change it, and you won't be stuck with it for the rest of your life. Anyway. And it's a lot cheaper than tattoos. I was stunned when I heard how much tattoos cost. I mean, it's just a fortune. I mean, they're art, and I understand that they're artists, and yeah, it's nuts, absolutely nuts. Anyway, if somebody had a tattoo that was idolatrous, like let's imagine someone had, a big picture of Zeus on their back, and then they did tshuva. Right, so they've decided, oh, this is terrible. If it is idolatrous, then yes, it would have to be removed. If it was just a regular non-idolatrous sun because they just liked the sun, they wouldn't have to get it removed according to Jewish law. They shouldn't get any more, but they wouldn't have to get it removed. The more interesting, complicated question is, what happens if someone gets a tattoo with God's name?
In Hebrew, I've seen it.
Yep.
yes.
Yeah, in the Hebrew. In Hebrew.
In Israel.
Right. The problem is you can't erase it. You're not allowed to erase God's name. But on the other hand, you're not allowed to take God's name into a bathroom. So what do? You have to cover it. You have to cover it. Exactly. You have to cover it when you go into places where you shouldn't be taking God's name. So this is why you think before you write into your body something. All right. So if you take these, you cast them in the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea, as we're going to see, is considered to be the ultimate place of no benefit. Right? It's not just destruction, because destruction could still be beneficial, as we're going to learn. So this is the ultimate place where you can get rid of them. They won't fall into anyone else's use, and they will not be a benefit to anybody or the world, because idolatry is a benefit to no one or the world. So Dead Sea, boop, off they go. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, however, has a slightly different adjustment.
Shimon ben Gamliel says, if one of these figures is upon precious utensils, they are prohibited. But if upon common utensils, they are permitted.
Right. So if it's a clay pot, and some kindergartner scrawled a sun on it, you don't need to worry about that as being idolatrous. It's just a pot that someone decorated. But if it's precious, then again, even without evidence that it was idolatrous, if it is precious, especially in their day and age, the assumption would be people who take precious items and put these images on them are creating idolatrous tools. Therefore, off it goes to the Dead Sea. So he makes a little distinction between whether of what our assumptions should be.
What is the definition for prominent?
Common. Of common or
prominent? Yes. Like, how can we decide? Okay, this is prominent or this is common.
Right. Well,
what is it? Which by value? This a certain minimum value or maximum value that makes the utensils prominent. Is it material?
Yes, it's culturally relative, right? So depending upon your culture and the material style that people use, wood may be perfectly normal, but nowadays wood hand carved would be considered precious. But 500 years ago, it wasn't that precious. And things like gold and silver are almost always precious. Iron used to be precious, now not so much. So it is a culturally relative term. And that's why you can't just have a fixed number. And then Rabbi Yosef?
Rabbi Yosef says, he may grind an idol to powder and scatter it to the wind, or throw it into the sea. Proscribed stick to your hand.
Oh, you skipped the line.
Oh, okay.
They said to him,
they said to him,
meaning the rest of the sages, they're rebutting.
They said to him, even so, it may then become manure. As it says, let nothing that has been proscribed stick to your hand.
Right. So if you just grind it up, you might think to yourself, I don't want to go all the way down to the Dead Sea. I'll just grind up the idol, right? Or grind up the item and just throw it to the wind. It doesn't go away. It's going to land somewhere, and wherever it lands, it will help that part of the earth grow. Right? There's a benefit, right? So you can't just do that. And the same thing, you throw it in the ocean eventually feeds the land. This is a benefit. The great thing about the Dead Sea is it is a pit that nothing leaves. Right? You throw it in the Dead Sea and it just stays there forever because the Dead Sea has no exit. That's why it's the Dead Sea, because there's no out hole.
So what do we do nowadays? Because we're not close to the Dead Sea.
Well, nowadays we're quite lucky because we don't live in places or societies where we are going to find an idolatrous utensil. You would have to go looking at specialty stores if you wanted to try and buy an idol of Zeus or a Baal or anything. Right? It's not the kind of thing that you're going to just walk down the street and discover this. I don't know about you, but I get to perform the mitzvah of lost and found very, very rarely these days. And I only do it more because I work in a public institution, which means people will come and they'll leave their sweaters behind or things like that. But for most people, when was the last time you were walking down the street and saw something that was lost? Not so often. So this is not, for us nowadays, not a real everyday kind of concern. Thank goodness, and especially thank goodness that idolatry has become so gone from most of the world. All right, now we're going to get one of my absolute favorite stories about idolatry. This is just one of my favorites. And it shows the great interaction between our sages and the idolatrous people they lived among in the land of Israel. Okay, ready?
Yeah. Mishnah 4.
Mishnah 4, yes.
1. Prokolos, son of Prosophos.
All right, so what do we know about this guy? He's got a Greek identity here, right?
Okay.
He's like Greeky McGreek. It's like the difference between, Plony ben Plony. He is like so Greek, it's just Greek. So Mr. Greek is talking to Rabban Gamliel.
Asked Rabban Gamliel in Akko when the latter was bathing in the bathhouse of Aphrodite.
Right, so Aphrodite, right? This is the Greek goddess of love. In the Roman world, she became known as Venus. So apparently, Rabban Gamliel, like the greatest of his generation, is at the bathhouse of Aphrodite. Right? And Greeky McGreek is asking him,
What are you doing?
What are you doing? What are you doing in my goddess's bathhouse? Okay, onward.
So he said to him, it is written in your Torah, let nothing that has been proscribed stick to your hand. Deuteronomy 13:18. Why are you bathing in the bathhouse of Aphrodite?
Right? It's a pretty good question.
Very good for a Greek person to know so much.
Yeah.
So much, right?
Okay. So,
He replied,
right, well, just a second. We have to remember we're living in Israel, or I mean, at least Akko, depending upon your borders, I mean, is in the Judean influence. And so knowing that this is part of Jewish culture is the same way that, I know some things that are written in the Christian Bible because I live in America, which has a majority Christian population. So the fact that a non-Jew would know a little bit of Torah makes sense, especially a piece of Torah that probably was quoted to him every time one of his Jewish friends or Jewish customers had to say to him, I can't let that stick to my hand, every time the idols thing came up. And think about it, what it would have been like to be a Jew living in a country under Roman control, therefore we're not allowed to get rid of idols. And there is so much foreign presence. How many idols would have been around everywhere? Think about that frustration that would have been felt. But also think about what position then the Jews were in of how they decide how to relate to this. So that's Rabban Gamliel's question. He is caught, if you will, in the bathhouse of Aphrodite. And this guy's going, oh, I see. You like the bathhouse of Aphrodite, do you? And Rabban Gamliel has to come up with an answer.
Okay. He replied to me, we do not answer questions relating to Torah in a bathhouse.
Right, so the first thing, okay, that was just Nathaniel got picked up. So the first thing we find out is we don't talk Torah in the bath.
He's a good teacher. He didn't know the answer. He wanted to earn more time to think about what he's going to do.
No. This is true. This is a true teaching of Torah in general, right? I know when I take a bath, I can read lots of books when I go to take a bath because sometimes it's nice to relax. I don't get to take any of my Judaica books into the bathroom. That doesn't happen. I use that's where my secular studies happen. So that statement that we don't talk Torah in the bath is a very real and true statement for Jewish life in general. Right? So, by the way, if you ever bump into me in the bathroom, probably not a problem for you too, don't ask me a Torah question while we're in the bathroom. Wait till we get out, and then we'll talk Torah.
What is read Torah? You can read a commentary about the Torah or a book about historical interpretation of Megillat Esther. Is that okay, or is nothing related? You understand what that means?
I understand.
Like how direct should be the study in the Bible?
Right. I mean, okay, maybe I can't take a Sefer Torah into the bathroom.
Or read the Torah itself.
Or read the Torah, or read a translation of the Torah. But could I read a commentary about Rashi about Torah? Right. How far removed? Or could I read a history of the Jews of Spain?
Exactly.
Right. So the question then becomes,
Attorney.
what?
Attorney, I'm sorry.
No. He's asking the right question.
It's
Because
I like
it's
to read in the bathroom, and
Right.
that's the material that usually I read. So for me, it's a very practical question.
absolutely.
So you're
Right.
not allowed to talk about the Torah in the bathroom?
That's where we are. We're on Mishnah 3:4. Right. So the question then becomes, are you reading this for historical edification, or are you reading this for spiritual growth?
Spiritual growth.
Then you may want to rethink your location. Right? In Judaism, as much as we respect the body, and we are very happy that our body works the way it works, and that God has given us a body that works, or at least mostly works, we still make a separation between places where the body does things that are less elevated from our elevated activities. And that is a way, kind of a bit of a pun on what's coming later, is a way that we make a distinction between what is elevating and what is not. So we may want to talk about your some alternative reading materials.
I have another answer. Selech Hasyal, fence. Do you have a mezuzah on your bathroom? No material that is connected to Torah, commentary, or anything go in there.
Right, but it's the underlying principle that's the important one. And that underlying principle is going to be exactly what Rabban Gamliel uses as his reason of why he can go to the bathhouse of Aphrodite.
Okay, I have a quick question for you. So I was listening to you on a video.
Right.
You know?
I got a lot of them. Yeah.
So I was in the kitchen, and from the kitchen, I walked over to the bathroom. And then I felt weird about it.
Mhm.
You know, it's
Yep.
so interesting. And so I just shut it down and I washed my hands, brushed my teeth, and then I went to bed and I listened to it again. So it's interesting that that's the case, because I, automatically felt I should be listening to Rabbi.
Right. So let me give you a personal distinction, right? Because on my phone I have my app that gathers all of my different news feeds, and I have categories for science, for technology, for history, for the news, and for Judaica. And if I'm in the bathroom and I'm reading through that, the Judaica one stays closed. Now, news from Israel, I'll absolutely read that when I'm in the bathroom. And that's where I'll sometimes catch up on some of the most recent craziness. And American news, I'll absolutely read there. But things that are interpretations of parshiot, or even history things about Judaism specifically, I save that for when I exit. But again, let's see what Rabban Gamliel's answer is, because I think it's really going to make the point even better. So we are on part 4. So chapter 3, Mishnah 4, part 4.
Oh. When he came out, he said to him, "I do not come into her domain. She has come to mine. People do not say the bed was made as an adornment for Aphrodite. Rather, they say Aphrodite was made as an adornment for the bed."
All right. So very important distinction that he's trying to make here, and one that had relevance when we lived among idolaters, because we lived among idolaters and we had to figure out how to navigate this, which is that's Aphrodite, right? The question is, which came first? Did the statue of Aphrodite exist, and then they decided to build a bath around her? Or did they build a bath and then decide to stick a statue of Aphrodite because everyone likes looking at pictures of women? Right? What was the purpose of her there? Was the bath there to celebrate her godhood, or was she there to celebrate the bathhood? And
for them to celebrate the godhood.
well, actually, what Rabban Gamliel is saying is no. You wanted a bath, right? You built a bathhouse because that's what you guys do. And Rabban Gamliel apparently approves. He likes taking the baths too. And believe me, these ancient baths, these were a wonderful full-day spa experiences. You'd want to use these bathhouses too. But he's saying you built a bath because you like building baths, and you came to the bath because you like coming to baths, and you put her there not because it's a celebration of her divinity, but because having statues around is a pretty thing. She came into my bathhouse. I didn't go into her shrine. That's the distinction he's trying to make. But then he gives an additional reason, and this is going to come back more to our topic of reading material.
Another reason is, even if you were given a large sum of money, you would not enter the presence of your idol while you were nude or had experienced seminal emission, nor would you urinate before it. But this statue of Aphrodite stands by a sewer, and all people urinate before it.
Right? Right?
Yeah, he's right.
I mean, think about that. I mean, you're really treating this as divine while you're going to the bathroom in front of it, right?
It was really.
Wouldn't we say show some respect, right? And so, but what he's doing here is he is taking what was an insult to him of you Jews are hypocrites, you're willing to use our bathhouse even though it has a statue of Aphrodite in it, and turning around and saying, you're the hypocrites, you're willing to go urinate in front of the thing you call God. Right? What's up with that? Because I would never do that. And even you, if you truly believed it was God, if you believed that statue was divine, you wouldn't either. So it's your actions which are showing that this statue truly has no divinity in your eyes. And
he explained this, well, obviously he talked about this after the fact, not during the bath.
yeah, when they left, yes. Exactly. So to come back to reading material, would you urinate in front of this material? Would you be willing to, relieve yourself while holding that book? That should be the bar that you use as your mental measure of, is it okay to read this in this place? Yes.
But what if you have all of a sudden some form of internal illness that just hits you hard,
Mhm.
you're not allowed to pray?
No, as a matter of fact.
That's impossible.
So-
It doesn't touch him, want us to pray to him,
Uh,
and call him
Yeah.
out, and like Psalms and Proverbs, it says, call out on Adonai and you shall be saved.
Absolutely, but not while you are in the middle of the act, to try and avoid being too graphic, right? So before and after, absolutely.
So I'm just gonna basically die in the bathroom for not able to say a prayer.
If you honestly believe that God is only going to save you from your intestinal difficulties, if you pray while in the midst of your bathroom difficulties, I'm not sure that you understand how God chooses or doesn't choose to intervene in this world, right? God didn't let someone die on the toilet because they refused to bring his name into that place, or because they chose to not bring his name into that place. That's not the way God works from anything that I've ever studied. God would much rather us do what we need to do, leave the bathroom, and thank him for our body being able to let us leave the bathroom. Or to have a real medical problem, to go to the hospital, take care, and have other people pray on our behalf and ourselves if we're in a state to do so. All right. But then he gives a great summation here, which is going to become a very important overriding principle. So this is part A of part 5.
In the Torah, it is only stated, their gods, Deuteronomy 12:3. What is treated as God is prohibited. What is not treated as a deity,
as a god.
Deity is prohibited.
All right, so this is a very important point. One we're going to get into more detail later, but I want to lay out the sort of general framework now because it's subtle. It sounds clear, but it's subtle. So I'm going to use that for an idol, right? Because I'm not going to actually draw a picture of an idol because A, I'm not a very good artist, and B, I don't like drawing idols. So there's an idol, and there is Mr. Idolater, we're going to call him I, and Mrs. Jewish person. The idolater treats the idol like a god. How should Mrs. Jewish person consider that idol? As something that is prohibited or permitted? Prohibited, right? Because he's treating it like an idol. It therefore has a status of idol, and therefore it is prohibited to her. She doesn't think it's a god, right? She doesn't think that it's divine. She knows that it's just a statue, a rock, a stick, a painting, or whatever. His relationship to the idol is what matters. That is what she has to check out, right? She has to look, how is it being treated by idolaters? If they treat it with respect, I have to prohibit it. If they treat it with disrespect, then it doesn't bother me. That's why Rabban Gamliel is saying, I can go into the bathhouse where people are doing all these things. Remember, they had like public toilet things and use it because they're already treating it with disrespect. Therefore, I can see their relationship is, and I don't have to worry about whether this is prohibited. But what happens if there's no idolater around and you just see the idol by itself? Now you don't know whether or not this object is sacred or not sacred. Remember the utensils, the spoons and pots and things that we found with items on them. If I just find it, I don't know for sure whether idolaters worship this or don't worship this. Maybe they use it to, clean up their pigs. Maybe they use it to worship their god. I don't know. Because I don't know and I have no way of seeing what they do, I have to treat it as though it's an idol and hands off, right? It is prohibited.
Just to be safe.
It's because I have no way of judging it. I can't look at it and say, well, I don't treat it like that. Only an idolater can desanctify an idol, which is the most bizarre concept. Only they can show us whether they treat it as a god or it's not. And if they're missing, from that equation, they're not around to tell us, then it's hands off. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so again, I don't know how many times you've said this, bless you. Intention matters. And in this particular case, it's the intention of the idolaters that matters. All right, 3-6. Right, did I skip one?
Yeah, fine.
I'm sorry. I looked down and I thought I hadn't flipped yet. Yes, oh yeah, perfect. Yeah, this carries on the same way. So 3-5. I thought we had done something.
1. If idolaters worship mountains and hills, these are permitted, but what is upon them is not permitted. I mean, but what is upon them is prohibited. As it says, you shall not covet the silver or the gold that is on them, and take it. Deuteronomy 7:25.
All right, there's my mountain. And there's my little Jewish person. And there's the idol on the mountain.
Made out of gold.
Well, it's an idol. It doesn't have to be made out of gold. It can be made out of rock, wood, whatever, but it's definitely and clearly an idol. The question becomes, as the Jewish person, am I allowed to walk on this mountain? This mountain is worshipped, right? This is the mountain of the great spirit of whatever. It's Mount Olympus. Am I allowed to walk on the mountain? Am I allowed to pick up rocks on the mountain? Am I allowed to collect berries on the mountain?
I guess you would have to ask their permission.
Well, permission aside, right? Assuming that they're not going to come out and try and stop you, kill you, or anything else. It's just, you can see that this is a mountain that is worshipped by idol worshippers, but no one's around to tell you what to do. No one's around to tell you not to. No one's guarding it. Am I, by Torah, allowed to benefit from the mountain? According to the Mishnah.
I think it's like the last Mishnah. If you have a doubt, just don't do it. No?
The mountain and the hills are permitted. What is on them is prohibited. Right? So let's imagine there's a little idol shrine, right? Like a temple to the idol. And it's raining. You're not allowed to go into that to get shelter from the rain. But you can absolutely go into a cave on the mountain and get shelter from the rain. Even though they call the mountain holy, we don't recognize the whole mountain as being an idol. We only recognize what they've stuck on the mountain, what they added, because who made the mountain?
God.
Exactly. So no matter what they call the mountain, this Holy Spirit or whatever, they didn't make it. God made the mountain.
So you can still eat the berries or whatever.
Eat the berries, use the wood, walk on that trail, enjoy the view, no problem. Go enjoy the shade of their idol. Go and enjoy the hospitality of their idol worshiping. No, no. Buy the idol and use the gold off of it. No, but the rest of the mountain belongs to God. Only the idol belongs to them.
What about this mountain in Brazil? You have the statue of Jesus.
Oh, right.
Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah, it's in Rio. Yeah,
Rio.
yeah.
What's
Corcovado.
this considered?
An idol?
Well, again, this is a question that we've had lots of discussions about before. The majority of opinions are that Christianity is not to be considered an idolatrous religion. But let's imagine it was an actual idol, right? A big picture of Ishtar, right? A giant statue of Baal or Set or any of the Egyptian gods. Well, let's imagine it was really clear, undeniable, an idol, and people were actually bringing up offerings and putting it down in front of it and all of that. Then the statue part, off limits. But the rest of that mountain, sure. You want to go hang gliding? No problem. That's no problem. Enjoy the view. But the actual statue and the shrine and all of that, that's where the line would be drawn. The part that was added to the mountain, as we're going to see, that's the defining line.
So Christianity is not considered an ideology? I mean,
By most rabbinic authorities. There is a long-standing debate about this. It's not something that we can easily look at all the different opinions, but the majority say that the theology, the actual belief of Christianity that is written by their scholars, they do not claim to have any power in their statues or any power in their symbols, that those are artistic representations.
That's what
But
Okay, I could say with the Protestant,
Yeah.
that, Protestant and certain ones, yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. But the Catholic, everything, the beads, everything has something to heal you. It is an idolatry in the Catholic religion.
right. So as I was saying, the theology says no, right? But I didn't finish the sentence, right?
Okay.
So if you asked a priest, does the statue of
Mary.
Jesus or of Mary, right, is the statue itself have power? They will say no. Of course not, right?
They used to say yes, and that's what is confusing you.
Does it, whether they actually say yes or whether they say you have to show respect and you have to show devotion?
Now they say that.
Right.
When I was being raised,
Mhm.
you know, that was the biggest fight that, you know, the Christians
And
and
the
that
Protestants.
Whether God was in the statue?
that God was in the statue, that if you touch the statue was going to heal you.
And
Yes.
I
So
would,
that's why
Right. Well,
she gets.
there
I
are some things in terms of miracles and all of that, which again, as we've talked about within our own backyard, there are issues within Judaism of,
Kabbalah.
well, not just Kabbalah, but if you go to the graves of saints, and if you go to the graves of holy people, and if you pray there, if you touch there, if you know whatever, you'll have a match, you'll have fertility, and there are issues like that too. Most do not say that has to be idolatrous, but yes, unfortunately, some people will act in idolatrous ways.
Yeah, because I went to, I've never been to Catholic church in my entire life. Probably 3 times I have only.
Mhm.
And I was like begged to go and visit. So I did. And Father Charlie asked anybody if they wanted prayer, healing to come. And they had this candlestick that goes like this. And then you put your neck on it and it's supposed to do something. I wasn't paying attention. I just went with the flow. Because I don't understand Catholics. I just,
Right.
Stupid me should have just sat back, but someone pressured me to go. And when I went and, put my neck on the stick, candlestick on both candlesticks like a cross, I got really sick. I got sick like a dog. I thought, I almost had to go to the hospital.
Right.
And
Well, definitely if anyone tells you to try and do any sort of ritual like that,
yeah,
not a good idea. Not a good idea, even if they are wearing a kippah and talit.
They said that the priest was saying that the stick will heal you, and I guess they believed it's some magic, and that's what
Like I said, not being there, I can't give an opinion.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying, like, for you to say Christianity has no, Catholic is considered Christianity, so I don't consider it, but.
Well, I'm basing off people who have devoted good portions of their life to studying it as scholars, rather than just personal experience. And I bow to those that are greater than me on that topic. Yerach, part 2.
Rabbi Yosef, the Galilean, it says, they're gods on the mountains. Deuteronomy 12:2. Not their mountains, which are their gods. Their gods on the hills. Not their hills, which are their gods.
Right. So again, he's bringing another text to say that what we are worried about is their gods on the mountain. We're not worried about the mountains that they worship. Right. So even though they call the whole mountain a god, we're only upset about the idol they've stuck on the mountain. The mountain itself belongs to God. The real God. Okay. So then, now we're going to come to a little bit of a question, because we have this thing called an Asherah. Go ahead.
And why is an Asherah prohibited? Because there was a manual label connected with it. And whatever has manual label connected with it is prohibited.
All right, so imagine in this shrine in the mountain, rather than an idol, there is this beautiful sacred tree that people come and they worship and they give offerings to. That's an Asherah.
Is this tree a real tree? Yeah.
Oh yeah, all over the place. In the ancient world, the Asherah were everywhere.
Now they extinct.
Well, people still worship some trees, but the particular Asherah, the cult that was in ancient Israel, is not around anymore. But people still worshiping trees. Absolutely, people still worship, some trees. And what he's saying here is, here's the question: is if the issue is whatever God made can't be turned into an idol, then a tree wasn't made by people, that was made by God, right? If they built a statue of a tree, that's obviously a human made, but a tree, that should be fine. So can't I go and sit under the shade of an Asherah, right, and benefit from it? Can't I eat the fruit from this tree because it's just like the berries of the mountain? And the answer that he's giving is, no, because even though, yes, technically the tree itself is a natural object, it has been groomed by humanity to be this object of worship. And that grooming takes it from being natural and turns it into being man-made. And once it's man-made, it can now be categorized as an idol and therefore off limits. Make sense?
And it can be confusing as well, because if you're sitting as a Jewish person and underneath this tree, they could be thinking that you're worshiping it as well.
Well, I mean, that is an issue, but when the rabbis are trying to draw the line as tightly as they can, and then they will put additional protections in. But what they want us to know here is that even a natural object, if it has been sculpted by humanity, that then can fall into the category of idol. So, to use the example before, if you were to come across this and there was a rock garden that was idolatrous, where all the rocks had been shaped into a picture of their god, then even though those are all natural rocks, right, they're not idols, no one carved them, the fact that they were shaped in that way, now they're off limits, right? Once manual effort has gone into creating something, even if it was originally natural, now it's been turned into a man-made idol. And again, that's the thing that you'll see over and over again in the prophets, is the thing that has the work of your hands is what you worship. If it wasn't worked by human hands, even though it is worshipped by humans, it is not prohibited. But once it's been worked by human hands, now it's in the category of prohibited. Make sense? Okay. I guess if they put their hands on it, we keep our hands off. That's a bumper sticker synopsis. All right, so then Rabbi Akiva tries to chime in.
Rabbi Akiva says, let me expound and decide the interpretation before you. Wherever you find a high mountain or an elevated hill or a green tree, know that an idolatrous object is there.
All right, so what Rabbi Akiva is saying is he's not contradicting anybody. He is adding an interpretation which is telling us, why does it talk about the mountains and the trees and the hills if the real problem is the idol that's on them? If you come across a mountain in an idolatrous place, and it's this lofty mountain, it's this impressive hill, it's this impressive tree, if you check, you will find an idol somewhere on it. Right? That is how pervasive the impulse to idolatry is. That any place that is impressive, somebody sometime has worshipped it. That is why he says that talks about the mountains, the hills, and the trees, because that's your clue. It's like, a scavenger hunt. If you wanted to find an idol, go check the mountains. That's where they're putting them. That's where you're likely to come across them. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wonder so many times Hashem told us, don't become idolatrous, don't. It's so around.
Well, it's so around, and it is such a natural thing. Right? The steps to idolatry are so easy, and they're so simple, and they are so seductive. Because idolatry, in a very elegant way, not to give it praise, but in a very elegant way, flips the relationship between humanity and God and puts us in charge. It takes us from being God's creation and instead turns God into our creation. And therefore, rather than being under God's jurisdiction, the gods are under our jurisdiction. And rather than it being about what will we do in order to fulfill what God has asked of us, it's how can we compel this idol to do what we want by means of ritual and ceremony. So it really is much more attractive.
It's a very interesting topic, because now that you said that, isn't that what Santeria is about, like witchcraft and things like that? I mean, does that fall under that category? Because some of them do have like things that they worship. Like I went to an old friend's of mine's house and I saw that he had like this statue thing. I couldn't figure out what it was, but he had like these beads and stuff. Turns out that he was into that.
Right.
Stuff.
I don't know enough about Santeria to
Santeria is a
give any opinion.
Catholic form of, right?
No, it's not Christian at all. It has nothing to do. It's just worshiping, basically magic and stuff.
Right.
So that's why when you mentioned that, it reminded me of that situation. And he wants to control other things with what he wants.
Right.
You know, basically. So
there was a great early 20th century American educator and writer. Last name was Dewey. I'm trying to remember his first name. I'm feeling really bad that I'm blanking on his first name. His name was Dewey. He wrote a great book called The Quest for Certainty. And one of the things that he outlines in this book was the idea that the human instinct for wanting to believe that they are in control, wanting to believe that they know what's happening, is one of the fundamental drives that leads towards idolatry and magic and superstition and all sorts of other rituals that we use to make ourselves believe in this illusion that we are in control. And that's a major problem with the human nature, because there's so much in life that seems out of our control. We would just want to throw our arms around it, bring it in and say, no, we've got this. We know it. Hurricanes are a really good reminder that we're not in control. As is monotheism, which believes that gods are not broken into tiny little pieces and scattered around different mountains and trees and elemental forces, but that there is one thing that is beyond all of creation that we can never control. And that is a very powerful reminder. But it's a hard one because we don't want to be humbled. we don't want to feel small. We want to feel big and feel in charge. Yeah, we want the power. Even if we have to pretend we have the power and fake it and do superstition. I mean, how many people do superstition just because they feel like this might help them have good luck or it might keep them from bad luck? It's so attractive. It's so attractive. And idolatry says, yes, come right in. We can do it. And Judaism says, no, get away, get away. Not that we're powerless, but we are not powerful.
When I used to go bowling, I had to be in a bowling league with my ex-boyfriend Simon. I made like 4 strikes in a row for the first time in my life. So I said, I'm going to do it this way. I got superstitious. I started doing it this certain way. And then after I started doing this certain way, gutter. I said, screw this.
Yeah, well, I hear the best way to get a strike is to practice a whole lot.
No, the problem is the fact that I practiced a whole lot, I got worse.
Well, we can talk about that later. All right.
So I got superstitious.
About the Asherah, what kind of fruit tree is it? Is it fruit tree? I mean, it just not bothers, it just, I'm curious about it.
They were often oak trees.
Oak
trees, but they could be, those were the most powerful in the area. Strong wood and all of that, but it could be other types of tree as well. And people will worship anything. I'm not really joking there. I mean, people will worship just about anything. It doesn't take much, because usually once you end up worshiping something, what you're actually doing is worshiping yourself. When you look at all the stories of gods that come from polytheistic religions, the Greek gods, the Egyptian gods, and the Roman gods, and all that, the behavior is just human. They're not godly. I mean, they have power, but they have no divinity that is beyond human connection and human understanding. They are just big, superpowered bullies, which is basically what most humans, if they don't learn, would like to be. Right? Most people would just like to have superpowers and be able to do whatever they want and have no repercussions and ever tell them they're being bad or anything like that. They just want no limits and to be totally in charge. And that, when you admit that there is a God, that is the creator of the entire universe and time and space and beyond human understanding, that kind of rules out me for being top of the heap. But if I can imagine these superpowered gods that I know how to manipulate, because they're all petty and jealous just like human beings, then all of a sudden I'm like at least number 2 to superpower God. That puts me way up the totem pole. And yes, it is so attractive. Were you gonna?
No, I was just gonna say, I agree with you. What I was gonna say, you said.
Okay. All right. Let's see if we can bang out Mishnah 3 or chapter 3, Mishnah 6 before we wrap it up for tonight.
If a Jew has a house next to an adulterous shrine, and it collapsed, he is forbidden to rebuild it. What should he do? He withdraws distance of 4 cubits into his own ground and builds there.
All right. So here's what happens. The ultimate example of there goes the neighborhood. This is the land, right? This is my street. And here's my lovely house, right? In classic Israel, you didn't have pointy roofs. They were flat roofs because you used your roof territory. That's why you needed the parapet as the mitzvah. So I build my house. Along comes someone who buys the land next to me, and he builds Zarah, right? He builds an idolatrous shrine. Now, in the ancient world, it was very, very normal to build your wall touching the wall of the person next to you. That was stability, that was normal, no problem. And then there's an earthquake. Right? Earthquakes happen. And so the wall falls down. If I build my wall back right where it was, I will now be benefiting from his wall. Now, just like Rabban Gamliel said in the last thing, I was here first. They built their wall against mine. I'm allowed to keep my wall where it is. But if I rebuild my wall now, right, with their wall here, if I put my wall back, now I'm benefiting. So instead, my house just got 6 foot shorter. I just lost 6 feet because I have to move my wall 4 cubits in, which is about 6 feet, into my property to make sure there's a gap between me and the shrine. What it's like to live under their rules. Right?
And it's a lot.
Yeah.
Property were very small.
Oh yeah.
6 feet.
If your house was the size of this room, this is a good sized house for a regular person. And you imagine 6 feet. I mean, that's like from the wall to that edge of that table, and just boom, gone. But otherwise, you'd be benefiting from idolatry.
There's no law that this person who built the shrine cannot build touching your home.
In who's in charge?
They are in charge.
Right. But I mean, for most of history, houses that were built or buildings that were built like this, they would all be touching. That was normal. I mean, why would I rebuild a new freestanding wall and leave empty space between me and you? Who does that help? It just means I lose some of my territory, like our poor Jewish homeowner, right? So you would always build right up against. If you go to any of the cities in Europe, all the old cities, everything is built right against each other. That's how you had to use the space. So yeah, the zoning laws weren't going to help you here. And if you were going to complain, well, the people in charge were probably idolaters too, so they weren't going to listen to your complaint. Or worse, exactly, or worse. All right, so let's go ahead and continue this little neighborly relations.
2. If the wall belongs both to him and the shrine, it is judged as being half and half.
Right? So sometimes, I'm going to do a top-down view, right? Property, and this is the idol property, and this is the Jewish property. Sometimes the wall is shared. It's not 2 walls next to each other. It's 1 wall, and the wall overlaps the property line. This part of the wall, you can use. That part, you can't. Right, so you're still allowed to use your wall, even though it's shared, but you only can use the half that is your half.
So if the wall falls, you're going to rebuild, but you're going to rebuild 6 feet.
Yeah, if the wall falls, you're still stuck rebuilding further in. Yeah, but this is while the wall is standing, you don't have full use of the full depth of that wall. You only have half of that wall, because otherwise you're getting into their property, and in normal cases that would be fine. And many neighbors would share walls, and they would have holes that were shared through them, and all sorts of other things that could be done. not when the idolatress is on the other side of that wall. Yeah, it's no fun.
So it's like almost like so it's exactly like an apartment where your wall is your wall, but the next door neighbor, you can hear everything. And I hope they don't put a punch in them.
Yeah, well, hopefully most of these walls were made out of stone. So I don't think.
Well, yeah, I know, but I'm just using that as an example.
Yes, yeah, but yeah, you wanted to make sure you had good neighbors. All right, so then onward.
Number 3. If it's stones, timber, and rubbish defile like a creeping thing, as it says, you shall utterly detest it. Deuteronomy 7:26.
All right, so now we get a question of ritual impurity, and there's different types of ritual impurity. We're not going to go through all of them, different degrees of ritual impurity. But there is a type of ritual impurity that comes from the sherets, the creeping, crawly things. And what this is talking about is saying the leftover pieces of idolatry and shrine, touching them is the same as though you were touching a giant lizard. Right? That's the level of ritual impurity. And that's a ritual impurity that if you touch it, you become ritually defiled. But if you're in the same room with it, you don't. Or if you carry it without touching it, like under a sling or something, you're not. So that's one level of ritual impurity potency, if you will. However, Rabbi Akiva has a different opinion.
Rabbi Akiva says, it defiles like a menstruous woman.
That's a nida.
Yeah. As it says, and you will treat as unclean the silver overlay of your images and the golden plating of your idols. You will cast them away like a menstruous woman. Out. You will call them Isaiah.
All right, so he's quoting from Isaiah, which compares idolatrous items to the state of nida, which is not to say that somebody who's in nida is like an idolatrous object, right? Let's make sure we got the comparison only goes one way. But what Rabbi Akiva is using it for here is to say that the ritual impurity that comes from nida, which is transmitted even to somebody who is carrying, which makes it a more stringent form of ritual impurity than the creepy crawlies, that is the type of impurity that idols and idol bits transmit. Carrying these pieces without touching them, you are still now becoming ritually impure. Make sense? As he finishes off.
Just as a menstruous woman impurifies an object by carrying it, so also an adulterous object defiles by its being carried.
Right. So let's there's a quick example. If you were to carry a giant lizard on a platform on your shoulders, you would not become ritually impure. Right? If you touch it, you're ritually impure. On the shoulders, on a platform, you're not. On the other hand, if you are carrying an idol, says Rabbi Akiva, even though you didn't touch it, just by carrying it, you are now ritually impure. That it has a greater degree.
Eliminated during that time is still.
Right. It's a greater degree of ritual defilement, potency to cause ritual impurity. Ritual impurity can always be remedied, and that's not an issue. But the question is, how much ritual impurity does this have? And he says it's a higher degree than the other rabbis had said. Good?
Yes.
Good. All right. We will leave Avodah Zarah there.